That instead of essentially a meaningless dead universe, our universe is essentially living with meaning, innate meaning, existential meaning, and evolutionary purpose. It exists and evolves as a unitive entity. We've got the science, we've got the Nobel Prize given in physics to support that. And what that means is that we are inseparable, literally, from each other, our planetary home, and the whole world. And that consciousness, as the Vedic tradition states, isn't what we have. It's what we and the whole world are.
Dr. Jude Currivan is a cosmologist and planetary healer whose work bridges cutting-edge science with ancient wisdom traditions. She holds a PhD in archaeology and master's in physics from Oxford and is the award-winning author of the book, The Cosmic Hologram. In this episode, we explore how the very fabric of our universe is not random or mechanical, but alive, conscious, and profoundly interconnected.
What's really significant now is we do have the scientific evidence across, literally all scales of existence and many, many different fields of research. The evidence is there. And it's not about saying yes to spiritual. We can use different languaging, but it is saying yes to consciousness, that universal mind and consciousness is the inherent nature of reality.
Perhaps most exciting is how this scientifically backed understanding of unity consciousness provides a new framework for addressing our global crises, not as separate problems, but as symptoms of a larger evolutionary transformation.
The clues that quantum physics and relativity physics gave us, which were pushed to the side in philosophical terms so that the technologies could move forward. Now we're going beyond quantum physics and relativity, not to move them aside, but what science does really well at its best, it includes and transcends. So we're expanding to a unitive science, which is a science of consciousness and ultimately a science of love.
Before we get into this conversation, I want to ask you to join this amazing community of consciousness explorers. This whole idea of pursuing expanded consciousness and the boundaries of human potential while living a modern life is relatively new, which is why we interview revered masters, teachers, experts, and practitioners to help you on your own journey. To stay up to date on the latest conversations, simply click subscribe below and you'll be notified each time a new episode comes out. I am so grateful for all of your support and comments. I love reading them. Now let's dive into this conversation.
Jude, it's wonderful to see you today.
Scott, it's gorgeous to be with you, and I love the background to your vision, the beautiful trees, lovely.
Thank you very much. I'm fortunate enough to be recording this from beautiful Costa Rica. But where I wanted to start is, wow, you just have such a diverse background of business and academia and consciousness. I guess where I'd love to start things is when did the consciousness stuff come to the forefront of your life, and what were you doing at that point?
I was 4 years old.
Wow, so you're really a late bloomer, huh?
Absolutely. And it's been a scenic route ever since then. But I guess it really is fair to say that, because when I was 4 years old, and I've shared this quite a lot, I had what I know Dean Radin's been on your show, and he talks about supernormal phenomena. They're not supernatural or paranormal, but they are supernormal. They're altered states of consciousness and awareness, but then are natural attributes. So I was experiencing supernormal phenomena from that very early age, and continue to do so to this day. So it's been part of my life. So for me, consciousness from the very get-go was not something that I appreciated that we have. It's literally what I was experiencing, that we and the whole world are. And at that very young age, and going through school, I wasn't taught that. I don't think any of us were taught that. So what I was finding was that what I was taught at school wasn't gelling, wasn't supporting those very direct and very real experiences. So where I found what really became my saving grace in those early years was the ancient traditions of ancient Egypt and ancient India. So the Vedic teachings of ancient India were basically saying the world is as I was experiencing it. So consciousness didn't just came first. It became the whole way of me, my search, my curiosity to understand how what not only I was experiencing, but what the deep universal wisdom teachings and indigenous traditions have been telling us for millennia. How does that fit? How does that correspond? How does that make peace with a modern perspective, which is very, very different?
Mm. Yeah, it's amazing how we always talk about how we're discovering new things in quantum physics and all of that. And, to some extent there is that word discovering can be applied, but it's also, these things are not new. A lot of people, a lot of wise beings on this planet in various traditions have pointed to something similar, perhaps using slightly different language.
I think that's absolutely right. And yet I would also agree with you that those traditions were incredibly profound, are perennial, are universal in that sense. But they're also of their time. And we have made great, great strides forward, especially through a scientific investigation and approach. The problem was, I won't say problem. The situation has been, though, that from the beginning of the scientific exploration, it was deliberately divorced from any perspective of spirituality or any wider perspective of consciousness. So naturally, it saw its job and its progress as exploring the manifested, the material world, and not a deeper understanding of what we now realize through science, actually, is a deeper appreciation of its underlying nature and reality. So science has almost brought us to, I would say full circle, but spiral, that enables us to really now appreciate these deeper understandings, because that's what science is now providing the evidence and is converging with. So at that extraordinary time where we can bring all these threads of human exploration, inner and outer, together into an emergent and deeper understanding of who we are and what the world is.
How would you characterize your current reality view of what this is that we're experiencing?
Well,
I know that's a big one. I know that's not a small
no,
one, but
it's not, but
I
it's
know it's something you talk a
vital.
lot about.
Yeah, it's vital. I mean, first of all, my work has come to this point to be able to share the evidence base at all scales of existence across many, many different fields of research, that instead of essentially a meaningless dead universe, instead our universe is essentially living with meaning, innate meaning, existential meaning, and evolutionary purpose. It exists and evolves as a unitive entity. We've got the science, we've got the Nobel Prize given in physics to support that. And what that means is that we are inseparable, literally, from each other, our planetary home, and the whole world. And that consciousness, as the Vedic traditions states, isn't what we have. It's what we and the whole world are. Now, all that's great. And it's much more than a scientific revolution. So this is what I'm sharing with the world. And for me, it's the what then. Because if indeed unity isn't an aspiration, it is our existential reality. If we are microcosms, microcosmic co-creators of a living and loving and evolutionary universe, what then? Because we sure are not acting as if. So what's living for me at the moment is, in the turbulence of these times, which a lot of commentators are describing as a meta crisis, with a materialist, separatist worldview, really then framing that as fear-based. What I'm saying is no, with a unitive perspective, which we now have the evidence for, if we can reframe that metacrisis to a metamorphosis, which is an extraordinary evolutionary potential, we can realize, and not just metaphorically, we can realize that we are the dying of the old human caterpillar that has been a consumer and an exploiter is falling away. It no longer serves us in our evolutionary journey, but in that nutrient soup of the turbulence, imaginal cells of potential emergence are beginning to arise, to be activated, to come together, to find each other, to become organelles as a wonderful metamorphosis. And for me, that's both far closer to the truth of what I believe is happening, and secondly, is far more empowering because it's inviting us to leap into love, to come together, to support each other, to learn together, but to see the world through, as butterflies do, through completely new eyes and live in very different ways. One that lives as a pollinator of this world rather than a consumer of this world.
I love the reframe so much. And, it's what's become obvious to me because I've talked to a lot of different people about the evolutionary shift that's happening is the people that have went through a major spiritual awakening recognize that, that just doesn't happen on an individual level. It happens on a collective level. And that dark night of the soul and the shedding of the false self and all of these things, they must occur, and it can be incredibly painful, but it's kind of part of the process. And yeah, I guess, it does seem like there is a smaller percentage of people with that perspective right now. And what do you think needs to occur for more people to embrace this idea that, hey, this is actually a metamorphosis. This is par for the course. It's what we can expect as part of this evolutionary game that we're playing. Like, what do you think needs to happen?
Well, first of all, I think it is happening. I think we don't hear about it primarily because the folks who are ostensibly in charge of governments of themselves tend to be the ones that are most invested in the status quo and the old way of seeing. That's not completely true. There are some amazing folks who are leaders and who have this understanding and are seeking to be servant leaders for their people, whether it's organizationally or in government, whatever it is. But also, I would say that the media generally reports from that perspective of materialism and separation. And all of that worldview is not even recent science, Scott. That worldview of materialism separation is the mechanistic science of the 19th century. But because it drove the Industrial Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution drove all of the ways of we have been in the last 120 years or so, it's driven our education, it's driven our governance, it's driven our organizations, it's driven all of those. And that's the way we've seen and behaved in the world. But what's happening now, it seems to me, is for a metamorphosis, the evolutionary impulse literally flows through the caterpillar and the emergent butterfly. And I believe that our universe's emergent impulse, an evolutionary impulse has been on the go for the last 14 billion years to planets and plants and people, is on the tide now. It's on the tide. So this is flowing through us. So people are finding in each unique way that either in many organizations they're burning out and realizing they cannot go on as they have been. They are having a spiritual awakening of many, many different ways. And more and more and more and more it's happening. And you said you spoke to a lot of folks. I'm sure you've been taking the sort of the temperature of this evolutionary shift as I have. And I've been taking the temperature of this evolutionary shift for the last 40 years. Ever since I first heard a Beatles song when I was 11 years old. I've been working with All You Need Is Love. I've been working with All You Need Is Love since 1964. So what I'm feeling, and I've been seeing this because much of my work is not in the public eye. It is working with organizations and governments and folks like, parts of the United Nations, who realize that we need deep and rapid transformation. And now is the time. People, organizations that are coming from this perspective of helping humanity through this evolutionary birthing canal. And it's happening. And I think what people like you can do so wonderfully well is to share that with your community and encourage people to share it. I mean, I saw an article in a mainstream newspaper, tabloid newspaper, as we call it in the UK, the other day, about the universe is a hologram. Huh? So my book, The Cosmic Hologram, and this was actually contributed to by some really authoritative scientists, because this is where the evidence is leading. So more and more and more, this is coming into the public domain, and anything we can all do together to do and support that. I think it's almost like an aha moment for people. We know this. Deep within us, we know this.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a big wake-up call for a lot of people. And, the infiltration of consciousness and unity consciousness into these institutions is, I mean, to me, it's incredibly interesting, because I think a lot of us who've went on this journey realize that the most fundamental thing that can change everything is changing the consciousness, because all things flow from that. And I know that you've been involved in the Unity cluster, or helped establish that at the United Nations, which is the first political consciousness thing I've ever heard of, and kind of excites me, but I also don't know much about it. So can you talk about what that is and how you see this type of thing infiltrating institutions like politics?
Happy to. I would say that particular is I'll come back to about 3 or 4 years ago. A group of folks who have been working with the United Nations for many, many decades at very senior levels, both within the United Nations, but also in terms of civil society, people like NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and many, many other organizations. And these folks came together with the invitation of myself and some colleagues to see what could be done about this, because they realized that the SDG goals, which had been relatively recently passed by 190 plus countries, great intentions, but were not going to be able to happen. We're not going to be able to be fully implemented, because they came from that materialist worldview. And therefore, with all good intentions, they were very siloed. They themselves were separate. And these folks realized that with that perspective, they weren't going to be fully implementable. And in fact, they were falling behind. So about 150 folks came together. And one of the first things that was realized that is we're a story sharing species. Our underlying narrative drives our choices, our behaviors. So we came together and basically communally said, we need a new narrative. We need a unitive narrative, which is based on the unitive science that our whole world exists and evolves as in its wholeness, yeah? And that we are inseparable from it. And again, converging with universal wisdom teachings. So I helped to co-draft a unitive narrative based on those gatherings, and both the inner and the outer of that, the being and the doing of that, the masculine and feminine of that, and how that can empower and support us in seeing the world through new eyes and therefore choosing differently. And within that, we put a section on how that could be applied to the SDGs. So fast forward.
What is an
year.
SDG really quick, just so I can
Sustainable
define that term.
Development Goals. They're the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 of them, across things like women and girls' rights, equality, justice, many, many really aspirational, positive intentions, but nonetheless siloed, and therefore not interweaving and co-weaving together, and not coming from this unitive, conscious perspective. So after the Internarrative was put together, these folks then started to call themselves the SDG Thought Leaders Circle, because they realized that was just the start. So fast forward about another 18 months or so, a year or so, and a number of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, came together, all with this perspective, and said, let's go to the United Nations and see whether it might be possible for us to be formally accepted as what's called a thematic cluster of interests. And it's a unitive cluster. So they went to the UN with my help, and the UN for the first time in its then 75-year history said, okay. So the Unitive thematic cluster, the Unitive cluster was formed, and it now has a seat and a voice at the table of UN discussions and all the sort of things that happen where decisions, policies, interventions are discussed and hopefully put into practice. But that's not enough. So fast forward again, and the UN Secretary General is calling out for deep and rapid transformation and realizing that it, again, needs essentially a unitive perspective to make that happen. So last year, we called everybody together and more, well over 200 people, both within the circle and beyond it, to say, what can we do to support that call? And we came together in New York just before the Summit of the Future, where the Pact for the Future was signed off by, I think, 193 countries, and Declaration for Future Generations, to say this is how we can help, this is how we can empower all that's being called for now. And so that work is ongoing, it's expanding, it's deepening, and it grows across everything from transformation of economics and the finance system, education, governance, justice, all grounded on, underpinned and framed by this unitive worldview and a unitive narrative. And it's happening.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation so far. If you like what you hear, let me know by clicking like, subscribing to the channel, and responding with a comment around something that you found interesting in the conversation so far. In addition to these videos, I do a lot of writing on the exploration of consciousness and my own personal revelations in my newsletter called Consciousness, the Doorway to Human Evolution. To receive these updates and more, all you need to do is simply head to the link in the description below and you'll be added to the community of 20,000 plus consciousness explorers receiving weekly ideas and inspiration in their inbox. I look forward to hearing from you there. Now let's get back to the show.
Something I've always been curious about is, as we move away from this paradigm of separation, which is reflected in just kind of how our world is kind of cut up, right? In countries and these artificial boundaries and the coalitions of us versus them and all of that. Like, do you see a lot of this way of governance just falling away? Or is it a both and where we have countries, but maybe they function differently? Like, how do you think about that?
My sense is both and, but also my sense is that some of the countries that were really artificially put together, usually at the end of major conflicts, just lines on a map, where the cultural and ethnic commonalities are not there. Some of those may just fall away. Some of them may be regrouping. And some of them, just for example, England and our United Kingdom, that may change, but we have a deep history and therefore a deep cultural commonality that I feel will hold. And as you rightly say, Scott, I'm also seeing in many of the transformational economic approaches what's called bioregionalism, where bioregions are those sort of geographic regions that are natural. So, for example, they're around watersheds. So there's a commonality to the geography as well as often a commonality to the culture that makes them natural in terms of moving into new ways of community life and behavior. It's place-based. There's also something else that's starting to really come forward, but it's early stages. A buzzword at the UN at the moment is multilateralism, which is, again, many different voices, many different perspectives, not from a hierarchical sense, but many different voices at the table. Very holographic. I mean, all of these are naturally holographic because the wholeness of a hologram is expressed through its nestedness and in every part of it. So things like bioregional initiatives and also multilateralism naturally fit within this emergent understanding, and especially unitive-based bioregional initiatives and unitive-based multilateralism, where there's a realization of unity, not just in diversity, but unity in a profound belonging, where everyone belongs to that wholeness.
There was a discussion that I heard you talk on, where I think a lot of people have this sense, and I know there's been times that I've thought this, where it's like, well, if I've always just been one with the whole, one with everything, why the hell did I have to lose that? Why did I have to experience that and all the suffering that came with it? And I've heard you talk about the necessity of individuation.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really powerful concept that might be helpful for people to contextualize this metamorphosis that we're going through and why we had to go through that.
I agree. I think it's really important because, sometimes it's easy to blame and shame some of the journey we've been on, given the trauma that we hold collectively, almost as a result of a worldview of separation, an illusion of separation, a dis-ease of separation. But as a student of history, and my PhD actually is in anthropological archaeology, and my main thesis was this transformation from the Mesolithic, where folks were hunter-gatherers, to the Neolithic, where we became pastoralists and farmers, and what that meant, but going way, way back even before that. And the way I would describe it is the universe in its wholeness nonetheless differentiates itself to experience itself. So if we go back 14 billion years, our universe began in its simplest state. But from that simplest state, over billions of years, it went on an evolutionary journey from simplicity to ever greater levels of complexity and individuated self-awareness. And our planetary home has carried on that evolutionary arc from single-celled biological organisms. All the building blocks for us, by the way, existed in interstellar clouds before planetary systems even came into being. So our universe had a bit of a plan on this one. And that plan then went into planetary systems, able to then nurture further complexity through biological organisms. And that long journey of our planetary home has led us in the last sort of, our hominin ancestors go back 6 million years. Our earliest were called Ardi, and Ramada, and those beings differentiated from the great apes, the chimpanzees, and they came down from the trees and they started to walk upright. And what they did was the male and the female were the same size, unlike the great apes, where the males are huge and the females are much smaller. Our forebears, the males and the females, were the same size. We think the best evidence we had is that they pair bonded. So in a way, we were built for love from the get-go. We were built for love as part of a loving universe. So onward we go, and we go through all the hominin, ancestry and cousins over those 6 million years. And all our cousins have died out. We're the last ones of our kind. We're the last hominins. And here we stand. And in the last few thousand years, we have continuously differentiated ourselves as individuals from our tribe. And that individuation has enabled us to build communities from very small family numbers to larger and larger and larger and larger communities. But that has also meant that in that journey, as we've seen ourselves more and more individual, we've also seen ourselves as more and more separate. So instead of differentiation, we've moved through the journey where we've believed ourselves to be separate from each other, and all the choices we've made from that, and all the suffering that really we have had through that. I acknowledge that. But what it's done, Scott, it's brought us to this point where we perceive our individuality more than at any other time in our history, her story. And yet we're waking up to remember that we're inseparable. And that waking up takes all that journey and all the understanding that each of us is unique, and then invites us to come together, not in an undifferentiated grey gloop, but with all our unique gifts, with all our unique, the notes. We are each unique notes of this great symphony of consciousness. So we literally are at the most extreme level of that journey of individuation. And now we're remembering that it actually isn't about separation. It's about differentiation. It is about unity in diversity, but beyond diversity, in inclusion and in belonging. So that's why I'm not blaming and shaming it. I'm seeing it as something that if we can now realize this, we can also heal ourselves and release the trauma, but realize the journey has brought us to us as we are. I wouldn't have missed that for the world, with all its challenges and with all its ostensible pain. For me, the pain has been when I've not trusted the universe and I've tried to hold on until the pain of holding on was worse than the pain of letting go. I've had that in my life.
I think that's, I have experienced that as well. And my sense is that there's somewhat of an intelligent design behind that.
Yeah.
Where it's the reality unfolds in such a way so that you do reach that threshold, so that you can move into that place of trust and surrender. And
I agree.
Some of us are more stubborn than others when it comes to getting to that point. And you can count me in the stubborn bandwagon, that's for sure.
You could have counted me in the stubborn bandwagon, probably till I was about your age. And then I realized that it was completely unsustainable. And the universe is, I'd love to hear your story, because I think for all of us, perhaps, the universe taps us on the shoulder when it's time to wake up and let go and all the rest of it. And often we don't listen, so the tap gets harder and we still don't listen. And then a 2x4 comes and we're, okay, all right.
Yeah, I mean, I joke that I didn't ever want to be into spirituality or consciousness. I didn't have a choice, really. And for me, I came to this path through my own suffering, where I had done all of the right things. I went to Princeton. I was a star athlete. I was a founder of a startup. I had living in New York City, vibrant social life, company going really well, like all of the things. I had lived the success script in the United States, and I was miserable, and I couldn't understand why. And eventually, I was just brought to my knees. And what was really fascinating about my own experience is specifically lots of physical things forced me into spirituality, like physical manifestations. So the first one was when I was 24, I developed alopecia and I started to lose my hair because of stress. And that pushed me on the meditation path. And then when I was 30, I had a Kundalini awakening. And that basically, I thought I had developed epilepsy or Parkinson's. I was very confused about what was happening to me. It was all these weird things happening to me. And I became obsessed with figuring out what was happening to me. And I didn't choose that. I didn't want to have that happen to me. It just did. And, in hindsight, it was a tremendous gift because it redirected me on this path. It got me on this path, and it eventually brought consciousness to the forefront of my life. And, that's been the path that I was on. And I would say the other wrinkle and gift in that, which I would love to hear about your experience, but you eventually realize that you had to have all those other experiences that you had leading up to this, so that you could contribute in a specific way. And for me, one of the big confusion points that I had was when I immersed myself into spirituality. I was 30 years old. I was running a company. I was looking around and was like, how come everybody's a graybeard who's just been a full-time spiritualist their whole life? And like, if I really care about my own enlightenment, do I have to go like live on an ashram or do I have to go basically become a renunciate and do what these guys did? And, it just became eventually clear to me that like, I needed to figure out how to integrate consciousness into my business experience and all the things that I've done so that I could support others who desire that as well, and do so from a place of credibility. And so, it's just been a funny thing to have continuous experiences of like, oh, that's why I had to go through that. Oh, that's why this happened. And, there's immense reverence that comes out of that when you realize that it was all perfectly designed.
I love that. And thank you so much for sharing that. I don't know if you've heard, there's a quote by a Danish philosopher called Søren Kierkegaard. And he said, we live life forwards and understand it backwards. And that's exactly how you described it. He also had his dark night of the soul. He was very depressive, and he lived on the northern coast of Denmark. And he would walk along the coast every day to try and sort of really shake off the depression. And apparently one day he looked out to sea, and he's just the horizon there because there's no land. Sweden is over the horizon. And he suddenly had an epiphany, he had an awakening where he realized that the sky, he couldn't really understand couldn't see where the sky ended and the sea began. And his consciousness expanded into that wholeness, which is, some like you, the Kundalini, you're completely transformed through that experience. And yet other steps are slow, step by step. I mean, I think you said a couple of things that really resonated with me. Apart from the living life forward and understanding it backwards and realizing that nothing is wasted. And it's the journey, it seems to me, of what's ours to do. And by asking what is ours to do, what is mine to do, you ask yourself what was yours to do. You realize that all your experiences and expertise and joys and what you love to do can be integrated into this service for the good of the whole. And that's been my journey of curiosity and discovery and sharing. And for me, it really, I think, took a whole next level because my dad died when I was 10 years old. And then I had a terrible love affair when I was 19 years old. And so by 21, I pretty much closed my heart down because love hurt. Love hurt. And I mean, I was loving. My mum was amazing. She's the one who kept me loving. But it was a shallow love. It wasn't a deep love. It was almost as though the roots of my love had been too deep and I was frightened of them. And so for the next 24 years, 25 years, I moved into my head because that was safe. That's where I thought I was safe. And I closed my heart down. It's like when you turn the gas down, there was a flame, but it wasn't that flame. It was that little flame. Life went on, and I went round and round the houses on that. And then another occurrence in my life, another relationship that failed. And it failed, I think, because of that reason, because I couldn't properly love. That and the aftermath of that broke my heart open. And it's a whole story, but it broke my heart open. And what I realized was I hadn't been keeping myself safe. I had imprisoned myself. And that opened me up to love. And I don't just mean human love, I mean universal love. And so now when I describe a universe that is not only living, but loving, it's because for me, that interdependent benevolence that is at every level of our universe is able to, that is what I call, the unitive science, but the science of unitive love, which is something I'm working on. Because when we can take the vastness of our universe, realize we belong, realize that we are its microcosmic co-creators, wake up to be its co-evolutionary partners, and realize how much we are loved, and therefore our capacity to love, that changes everything.
Wow. I feel you as you say this, and it's truly amazing. And, one of the things I'm most excited about is people in our culture starting to recognize the power of the heart, and that the heart actually has a capacity to open once those patterns that keep it closed shift, so that you can experience unconditional love as your predominant state. And that fundamentally shifts how you navigate reality. And right now, it just feels like, besides the Heart Math Institute and some wisdom traditions, there really isn't a lot of people talking about it. Like, the science of the heart is still very, I would say, nascent, at least by conventional standards. So, what comes up for me is like that benevolence of the universe that brought you that heartbreak. Which probably seemed like a bitch when it was happening, but it occurred so that you could move into this metamorphosis.
It absolutely. I can't, looking back again, Kierkegaard's Hindsight, that was the moment. That was a pivotal moment. I'd been sort of following this unitive perspective literally all my life, but that was the moment where it transformed. And it became the we, me and the all, and that vastness. It's like the Kundalini. I had a Kundalini experience some years before that, but that moment and ever since, I've lived the universe and the universal love flowing through me. Literally flowing through me.
I mean, that's amazing. And I think a lot of people that maybe aren't kind of seeing their experience through unitive eyes, maybe we could phrase it like that, wonder, well, how would I actually, what would actually change about my life? Like, what would actually be different, right? If I went on this path, and maybe if I understood that, I would be serious about my commitment to pursuing it. But I think it's rather opaque for a lot of people. And so I'm curious for you, you had this inflection point, and then you've been having this unitive love flow through you since. Like, what is fundamentally different about your experience?
I'd almost reflect that back on you, because, what you came to an understanding of is this is who you really are. It's not a separate you. It's not even a really different you. It's you fulfilled. It's you filled rather than you emptied. It's in that sense. So for me, I was asked a question back in 2012, because there was all this thing going on about the end of the Mayan calendar and what's afterwards. And I said, well, for me, it's a moment. It's a moment in our evolutionary journey, and that's how the Mayans understood it. But I said, the other side of it, there's going to be red wine and chocolate biscuits, and that's what I'm bothered about. As long as there's a glass of red wine at the other side of it. So for me, it's I do what I do and what I've always done, but I do see it through new eyes, different eyes, progressively, the eyes of love. So it's about compassion. The basis of the word compassion is to feel others, and to, living the golden rule. I treat others as I would hope I would like to be treated. It doesn't always take, but more and more it does, because there's a wonderful cosmic principle of reflectivity. the universe reflects back to us. If we act with love, I would suggest that we find more love back to us. A friend of mine, Isley McTaggart, does wonderful work with intention. When we intend love and we do so altruistically without thought of ourselves, guess what? We get love back. We didn't ask for it, but we get love back.
That's
That's
right.
the way of it. So, I think just step by step, if we're open, if everyone is willing to be open to this possibility and act as if, very soon the universe shows us at such profound levels that we are indeed this. This is who we are. We are at the very heart of us, at the very foundations of us. We are consciousness and we are love. So just to say yes to that invitation to this wonderful adventure.
I love to frame things as an experiment to people, because ultimately it is the experiential reality that will shift someone's belief system and permanently. And so, to just treat some of these invitations as experiments is like,
Exactly.
what happens when someone's an asshole to you and you just love them and you just say, like what happens? And reality is an amazing reflector and teacher. But you have to take that first step towards it for it to step towards you.
That's my experience too. But when I guess please say yes. When we do take that first step, the universe comes back in an incredibly generous way. It doesn't just meet us halfway. In my experience, if we take a small step, the universe comes back and goes, yay! And the next step can take place. And I love synchronicities. I love the joy of synchronism. And, that's another one. Pay attention to synchronicities. Another one, trust your intuition. Experiment with it, as you say. See what happens.
Totally. And, it's just like life is so much more fun to live like that. Oh my gosh. Like if that's the only reason, right? Because it's more fun to experience and believe in magic. It just is. And so why not live a wondrous experience?
Exactly. And I think two things can hold people back. One is, and I'd love your sense of this, is a fear of losing themselves. There's a sense that you do have to go up and sit on top of a mountain, or you do have to, be a recluse, or you do have to get terribly serious, all of that, or somehow you lose your individuality. No. In my experience, I can hear and feel from yours and everyone I've ever come across who said yes to this adventure has become more of themselves, a more fullness of themselves. And it is so much it's wonder. It is fun and it is wonder. It is, it's experiencing the extraordinary as ordinary and ordinary as extraordinary. And dancing this glorious journey we're on together.
Yeah, I would echo that sentiment. I mean, I would say I was someone that had all of those concerns and, life didn't really give me a choice. But I'm so happy that it pushed me in that way. And yeah, I just would invite anybody listening to keep an open mind and experiment. And I think, the thing that really resonated with what you just said is this notion of authenticity, where as you go in that journey, you realize like so many things pre-programming, pre-trauma, like that was my essence being expressed. And that over the years, there were all these things that happened that developed these patterns of behaving that were kind of shielding that original essence. And as you kind of work on the consciousness that's creating those experiences, like, man, you just you restore that. You increasingly greater occupy that, and that just feels so freaking good. It feels it just feels so good. And it just also is incredibly motivating to make you keep going. And in fact, the funny thing is that I think a lot of people feel threatened by, essentially feel there's an unconscious threat to their intelligence that they had it wrong all along. That's why a lot of scientific people are kind of stay away from spirituality, because it's a perceived threat to their intelligence, which is how they derive their self-worth. But the funny thing is as you get on this journey, you realize that it's actually the intelligent thing to do to keep going. Like, it's actually not intelligent just to continue to be a slave to your conditioning and trauma and all these things. And it kind of flips for a lot of people.
It does. And I think what's really significant now, Scott, is we do have the scientific evidence across, literally all scales of existence and many, many different fields of research. And younger scientists, and I think I don't know a scientist who didn't become a scientist because they weren't curious. They were curious about the nature of the world. But the way they were trained was very much in this materialist, separatist perspective. And then you get into academia, which is very peer, very tightly peer controlled. And it's almost like a straitjacket. It's very difficult. So what I found is that a lot of scientists, either at the beginning of their career or at the end of their career, say, I just want to follow the evidence wherever it leads. And the gorgeousness of now is that the evidence is there. And it's not about saying yes to spiritual. We can use different languaging, but it is saying yes to consciousness, that universal mind and consciousness is the inherent nature of reality. And I think by phrasing it in that way, by framing it in that way, by framing it that this is actually able still to be scientifically investigated. And what we're finding is it's coming up because we're not able to explain the appearance of our universe without digging deeper. And the clues that quantum physics and relativity physics gave us, which were pushed to the side in philosophical terms so that the technologists could move forward, now we're going beyond quantum physics and relativity, not to move them aside. But what science does really well at its best, it includes and transcends. So we're expanding to a unitive science, which is a science of consciousness and ultimately a science of love.
Now that's a science that I would be excited about. Let's start looking at that stuff more seriously.
And as you mentioned earlier, some folks are. I mean, IONS are, HeartMath is. I think the Galileo Commission, which I'm part of, is going to be really looking at this as we progress over these next few months. So some big impetus, some big traction is starting in this direction.
Amazing. That sounds very exciting. Jude, what does the future hold for you? I mean, what are you focused on right now with your efforts?
I have no idea what the future holds. I can pretty much guarantee just about the next 5 minutes. But what I am focused on is, first of all, reaching as many folks as possible with this understanding that then, with folks like yourself and many others, can be invited into experiencing the world in this way. So I recently completed a short film called A Radical Guide to Reality, which is free to view and share. It's in 20 subtitled languages on YouTube, called A Radical Guide to Reality. I'm working, as I said, with folks across, all different levels of governance and people wanting to transform economics and education and governance and, peace building, justice, peace and justice and natural outcomes. A whole worldview. Whereas conflicts are a natural outcome of a worldview separation. So healing our worldview, our disease of separation, and then saying, now what? What can we do together now? That's what I'm focused on.
Well, it sounds like you got a lot of amazing, noble pursuits happening. So thank you for your contribution. And we will make sure to link out the film. As well as, is there any other place that you would recommend people start? I know you have a number of books for if people want to continue to explore your work further.
Yeah, thank you for asking, Scott. I mean, we've got pretty much all the resources in a website called WHOLE World WORLD hyphen dash view.org. Lots of free resources, lots of podcasts, and we'd love ours to be posted on our website. Lots of the evidence, Unitive Science Simplified. There's a film, we've got a wraparound with the film, invited experiences around the film, things like that. So there's a lot of resources and an invitation to this adventure.
Amazing. We'll make all those available easily in the show notes. And Jude, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure, and keep on spreading the good word. I'm really excited about what lies ahead for humanity, and I appreciate the efforts of people like yourself.
Thank you, Scott. And thank you for all you're doing, because what you're doing is so important. So please, keep on keeping on.
Thank you.